This is from Trek, and this is the brand new rail. So it's going to be running alongside the current model, but this is their high end, and with that high end comes high price. So it's a high end Trek rail that's basically got different geometry, the new Bosch Smart system, and some really cool tech on this that I want to share with you. Now, this is just a first look. The bike is so fresh. I've not even gone out for a ride yet. I've just got it into the studio and had a look around the bike and set it up, and I want to share with you some first looks and some first thoughts. So the two top end models, the Trek Rail 9.8 and 9.9, they're carbon frame bikes. They're going to be this new model that you see here. So if you saw my long-term review not long ago on the Trek Rail 5, that model still continues for 2022. And these models replace those two higher end models, and they're going to become the new high end models. So all you need to know is the Trek Rail 9.8 and 9.9 are this new model with new geometry and new Bosch system. So it's got the new Bosch system and some new Rockshox suspension called Airwiz. And I believe that this is a world's first. I've not seen this yet. Not to be confused with their recently released Flight Attendant. That's totally different. This is Airwiz. It's got more aggressive and more up-to-date geometry. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail. And slight differences to the frame and integration. So it's a new carbon frame. It's got a little bit longer out the front, basically to accommodate that 750 battery from Bosch. It's the same rib system, so it's super easy to remove. Still got the key. So the design is almost identical, but because the frame has grown, it now fits that 750 battery, which is really cool. So you can get some pretty long rides on the Bosch 625 battery at the moment. In theory, you can get an extra 20% in range, which I think is super cool. And actually, one of the things that I've noticed with the Bosch is when you start getting down to like 30, 40%, the voltage drops and it gives you less kind of grunt, and you can notice it. You might have experienced that the same if you've got a Bosch motor. And certainly when you get under 20%, if you're in e-mtb mode, it starts to kind of lose a bit of its punchiness. But with the 750 battery, you know, you're going to get more capacity and more punch for longer, essentially. Another thing is it's mullet ready. So it comes as stock as a 29er, but actually you can swap out the rear wheel, put a mullet in there, and there's a little flip chip, flip that, and you've got a mullet ready setup. So I kind of like that. I think that a lot of brands are going 29, 27.5 out the rear, and a lot of the time it's to bring the rear chainstay in so it's not so long. But in my experience, I think I haven't timed this, but a 29 for me feels faster. But I think it's great to have the option of a 29 or a mullet with that flip chip. So the geometry has been updated. It's got a steeper seat tube. So instead of a 75-degree seat tube, it's got a 77-degree seat tube. So you're perched a little bit further forward on the bike for the climbs, which is brilliant. You're a little bit more balanced. Should be easier to climb with your weight kind of being pushed a little bit further forward. It's also grown a little bit in length. The front is a little bit longer. It's now similar to the Slash. So just to give you a comparison to the 2021 rail, that in XL had a reach of 495. The 2022 is 520, so it grows by 25 mil. There's 4 sizes, small, medium, large, XL, and they've all grown in size. And I think that's pretty much a byproduct of having that longer battery, because Trek's kind of system with that rib removable internal battery is fairly unique. It's a side-loading battery, so they can't kind of tuck it under the frame. The battery is longer in length, so they've had to accommodate that battery by kind of stretching the front, and the geometry has grown as a result of that. So we've got 160 travel fork and 150 rear travel, and the frame has been really beefed up. If you look at it, it looks really kind of chunky and everything looks well proportioned. It's got a 34.9 dropper post. It's got a beefed up head tube area, and it just looks like, yeah, it just looks really well proportioned, and the design of it looks pretty cool, I think. I like the design of it. I think the curves work really well. And it's good when you get, because e-bikes are chunky, aren't they? But when you get, you know, thicker seat tubes and thicker head tubes, it just kind of looks aesthetically pleasing. I think so anyway. So let's talk about this new Bosch system briefly. I've done a couple of videos on this already, but just as a recap, the new Bosch system has 750 battery, new kind of revised motor, the performance is the same as far as Bosch are saying. I've not ridden this yet, and I'm really curious to find out if there's any small differences with the way it delivers the power or the noise that it makes, because the Bosch can have a little bit of a kind of low down rattle, a low down clunk. So I'm interested to see whether they've revised any of that. But they say it's the same motor, but the main difference is that you can now connect it to your phone. It's got a Bluetooth controller and it's got a new display that looks super high resolution, really smooth, and it's a much better offering than the Purion. And yeah, they've brought it up to date. I'm interested to find out actually how tactile and ergonomic it is when you're riding, because there's more buttons on it, and it looks to me like it could be a little bit fiddlier to press than the Purion. The Purion looked a bit rubbish. This looks much, much better. So that's one of the things I'm intrigued when I'm riding the bike. Is it intuitive? Is it easy to use? And does it not get in the way? The thing with all the electronics is they're fantastic in theory. Sometimes, just sometimes, they can be a bit of a barrier and get in the way of the ride. So I'm really curious to find out if the new Bosch Smart system just kind of disappears but is there when you need it. The Rockshox display is mounted on the top tube on this bike, and I think it's probably the best place to put that. I've seen some that hang it out the front of the bars or even on the bars, and if you turn the bike upside down, might get in the way. But I think Trek's solution on the top tube is probably one of the best in terms of just getting it out the way from any knocks and crashes. So it's a bit more out of harm's way there. Comes with a 4 amp charger. It'll fully charge the bike in 6 hours, which is pretty good considering it's a 750 battery, but it will give it a half charge in 2 hours. So actually, to top it up for an afternoon ride, it's going to do it in just 2 hours, which is really cool. And then there's a new Bosch app. So what it does is it connects to the bike and you can see things like your range. For the first time, you can actually customize some of the riding modes. Now, you can only actually customize 2 modes, the turbo mode and the eco mode. I'm not quite sure why that is, but the 2 modes in the middle, they're kind of grayed out, so it doesn't look like you can change those. But you can go into turbo or eco and change some of the parameters like the assist, how much it gives you when you start pedaling, the maximum amount of torque that it will deliver, the maximum speed, so you can play around and change some of those parameters to see if you can create your own kind of custom mode. The bike has 4 modes, so it's got eco, Tour Plus, which is a new mode, e-mtb mode, and turbo. So the Tour Plus mode actually has a wider kind of power delivery band. So at the lower end, you need to be putting in more effort to get the most out of the motor. So effectively, you need to work harder, but you get rewarded just the same amount as you would in e-mtb mode. Effectively, you should be putting in a little bit more energy, but getting more battery power out of your bike. But also it's not kind of capping that top power mode. It's still giving you that assistance, that top full 85 Newton meters and full watts of support from the motor. You just need to be putting in a little bit more effort. So let's talk about this electronic stuff. So separate to the Bosch system is SRAM's TyreWiz and Airwiz. And effectively what this is trying to do is to provide the rider the best possible experience and remove any kind of hassle when you're setting up your bike and give you the recommendations for your tyre pressure and your fork and your shock pressures. Now, really, you can do all of this manually. We've been doing this for many, many years on all of our bikes. And the idea of this is to remove all of the hassle. So in order to set it up, what you do is you get the SRAM Axis app, and within the app is all the details about the fork pressure, and the shock and the tyre pressure front and rear. So you put in your weight and it will give you the amount of PSI that you need to put in the fork and the amount of PSI that you need to put in the shock, and it will also show you the tyre pressures as well. Now let's just start with the fork. So I put in my riding weight, 87 kilos, and what it's done is it's told me that I need to get to a certain PSI in the fork in order for it to be in its effective working range for my weight. So effectively I'm setting the sag levels for my riding, and the same on the rear. And as you're inflating the fork and the shock, it's updating on the app live, so it's telling you exactly how much PSI is in the chamber for the fork and the shock, which I think is pretty cool. Now, Rockshox have been doing stuff for a while in order to help the riders, like simple things like sag markers on the stanchions have been really useful because you can just see whether you're at 20% sag, 30% sag, but this kind of takes it to the next level. So if you're setting up a bike for the first time, you just open the app, put in your weight, and it tells you how much PSI. Now, again, it's a guide. It's a starting setup. And usually those manufacturers' recommendations are pretty spot on now. So the fork indicator is going to tell you if you're in that kind of prime setting for your suspension with a little green flash. It doesn't actually do anything when you're riding. It removes any distractions. It's only when the bike is stationary that it will give you that display. And it's a very discreet little LED. It's not going to be in your face. So far, it's been really straightforward to use. I just pumped it up to the PSI that it said in the app, waited for it to go green on the fork, same with the shock, and there you go. It's good to ride. And I think these little things, hopefully they will trickle down over time and it will make everybody's bike setup that little bit easier, because there are a lot of folks out there that suspension, if you've been riding bikes for a long time, you kind of just get it ingrained in you how to set a bike up. But I think this is really going to help people that are just getting into it for the first time. And this is just a great way of setting up the bike. And it's exactly the same kind of thing for the tyres. It's going to tell you a recommended pressure for the front and rear. And if you're anything like me, I'm always checking my tyre pressure with my little tyre pressure gauge. This is just going to have it on your phone all the time, and it's going to tell you exactly what your tyre pressures are. Really, really neat. Now, arguably, not everybody needs all this stuff, but they're just adding all these little sweeteners onto your riding experience and setting up your bike. So I'm really intrigued as to, over the next few weeks, is it stuff that just you set, gets out of the way, and it just works really, really well? Or does it add more distractions and more hassle? That's what I'm going to find out. So it weighs 23.4 kilos, thereabouts. It's in XL, set up tubeless, without pedals, with the bigger battery and all the kit on it, which is, you know, it's not super light, but it is carbon with carbon bars, carbon wheels. It's got Trex tyres. The front one is an SE6 and it's got the SE5 at the rear. It's got SRAM's Axis XX1 wireless gears. It's got a regular cable operated dropper. Now, I'm really familiar with the existing Trek rail. I've covered way over 1,000 kilometers on it and I've used loads of different setups. I'm really familiar with how it rides. So I really want to understand with this one, is it better? How different does it feel? And I'd love to know what you would like to know about this bike as well. So please do put some specific comments down and put your questions. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. And if you want to be the first to see the full video when it comes out, subscribe. And if you liked it, let me know with a thumbs up and I will catch you really soon.